Hi, my name is Dr. Hamlin, and today I'm going to be answering the question, is it worthwhile to use a continuous glucose monitor to help control my type 1 diabetes? And I think this is an excellent question, and absolutely it comes down to personal preference, making the choice of whether or not you would want to wear a device on your body to help you measure your blood glucose levels. However, we do have quite a bit of evidence to help us answer the question of whether or not it will help to increase control and in what ways. And so today I'm going to review a very large study. It is a systematic review of randomized controlled trials and meta-analysis. It's a study that was published in February of 2022, and it's titled Effectiveness of Continuous Glucose Monitoring and Maintaining Glycemic Control Among People with Type 1 Diabetes Mellitus. And I will absolutely link this study below. It was published in a reputable journal and really did quite a good job of looking at whether or not glucose monitoring through a CGM is superior to doing the finger pricking and kind of the manual blood glucose measurements. And so what we saw was this study used quite a large array of smaller studies to collaborate its data. And that's really what meta-analyses do, is they look at many small studies, kind of pull them together, and they get statisticians to come in, kind of look at the data and interpret it in a way that we can kind of use these outcomes to say whether or not something has large evidence behind it. And so that's what happened here, and they were able to find some statistically significant outcomes, which is exciting because it can help us answer this question. And so this particular study looked at 22 smaller individual studies involving 2,188 individuals with type 1 diabetes. And the real purpose of this work was to assess the effectiveness of continuous glucose monitoring versus the self-monitoring of blood glucose through finger stick. And so what they found overall is that absolutely it did help lower hemoglobin A1C levels when switching to a continuous glucose monitor in a way that was statistically significant, and really showed that it could help to lower hemoglobin A1C, that especially in individuals with an A1C greater than 8%. We also looked at whether or not CGM use helped to decrease hypoglycemic events, meaning severe low blood sugars causing an emergency, or DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis events, which typically end up in hospitalization. And what we found is that actually in this particular view of the data, that CGM use did not decrease the frequency of those events from happening. However, it did help people lower hemoglobin A1C as a whole, specifically people with a hemoglobin A1C of over 8%. Now, looking at this data, we were able to kind of collectively say here that if you are a person with type 1 diabetes and you're interested in using a continuous glucose monitor, it's likely to help your A1C. We can kind of take that general assumption from this data. Of course, everyone is individualized. There are no guarantees with this, but looking, it's likely to. And when I think about the choice to use a continuous glucose monitor as a person living with type 1 diabetes, I remember when the Dexcom, which was the one that I first started using, first came out. I was in college, and it really was a huge piece of changing my quality of life. And that's something that this study doesn't look at. You know, it looks at the data of the numbers. But I remember having that Dexcom and learning to trust it out over the course of time, and being able to sleep through the night better and not setting multiple alarms to wake up and prick my finger to see if I was running low. I remember it making exercise a lot easier. I remember being able to glance at it, just being so helpful as I was in class or walking to class. Just that time of not having to sit down, pull everything out, prick my finger, get the number, and then make a treatment decision. Being able to do that more on the go was really, really helpful. And then kind of over time, I also learned how to use the continuous glucose monitor data in a way that was different and provided more nuanced, actionable steps for control. And really what I'm referring to is kind of looking at the slope of the graph. So when we have a blood sugar on finger stick, let's say it's 125, we can say, okay, you know, that seems pretty good. I'll go on with what I'm doing. But if we glance at our glucose monitor and our continuous glucose monitor, and we see a graph with 125 and a double down arrow, you know, that might make me think, oh, let me grab a snack before I head out for this walk. Or if I see 125 with a up arrow kind of sliding this way, it might make me think, oh, if I'm gonna eat dinner in a few minutes, maybe I should take my pre-bolus a little bit sooner. And a lot of that data and a way to interpret that, I learned from the book Sugar Surfing, written by Dr. Stephen Ponder, who also has type 1 diabetes. I highly recommend that book if you are interested in CGM use and kind of learning to interpret the additional data that you get from it. But absolutely, I think this study is a great testament to CGM being a great thing to at least try if you can. I think that it's really hard to know all the benefits that an individual can get from it until they try it out. And it's not a permanent thing. So if you try it and you don't like it, you can always go back to finger stick. And so I think the stakes are kind of low for trying something like that. But from personal experience and clinical experience, it's an absolute yes, worth trying in my opinion.